The shocking truth behind how Honda broke MotoGP with its impossible engine is a warning for every rider who's watched motorcycles lose their soul to perfection. Back in 2002, new rules gave factories a clean slate, 990 cubic centimeter four-strokes, open innovation. Everyone else played it safe. Honda didn't. They built a 5-cylinder V that shouldn't have run, yet it ruled the grid. But what it started, computer-perfect power, corporate control, and riders turning into passengers, is the reason bikes today feel more digital than alive. This story matters because it's where that change began, the rulebook rebellion. When MotoGP rewrote its rulebook in 2002, it was supposed to even the playing field. The idea was simple: innovation through freedom. But freedom means nothing when everyone plays it safe. Yamaha stayed with their V4s. Suzuki stayed in line. Ducati joined with red-hot confidence, but the blueprint was the same: 4 cylinders, symmetrical, predictable. Then came Honda. They looked at that same rulebook, the same page every other team saw, and found the one sentence that would change racing forever. It didn't say the engine had to be even. It didn't say it had to make sense. That's when the whispers started. Late-night drafts coming out of Osaka. Engineers sketching layouts that made no mathematical sense. Someone leaked that Honda was testing something unbalanced, something that shouldn't idle, shouldn't rev, shouldn't exist. The rumors were dismissed as madness, but Honda had done this dance before. In the 1970s, Honda quit racing over restrictions, then returned to dominate. Pride fueled every comeback. When 4-strokes arrived, those rules became a dare. Instead of refinement, Honda unleashed rebellion, an unbalanced engine that shattered logic and humbled rivals. It wasn't arrogance, it was defiance cast in metal. Behind the walls of Honda Racing Corporation, the engineers weren't chasing numbers, they were chasing revenge. They wanted to prove, once and for all, that Honda didn't follow the sport followed Honda. And to do that, they would build an engine so bizarre, so unthinkable, that even physics would flinch. The paddock mocked Honda's 5-cylinder science project until it screamed to life. Uneven, impossible, yet flawless. Chaos turned calculated. When that howl hit the track, everyone realized Honda hadn't built a motorcycle. They'd built a warning to the world. And the secret behind that warning lay inside a blueprint so unstable that no other company dared copy it, because what Honda built shouldn't have existed in the first place. The impossible blueprint. The story of how Honda's V5 came to life reads like mechanical mythology. 2 cylinders on one bank, 3 on the other. A design so uneven that even Honda's own test benches shook violently during the first runs. Most engineers would have scrapped it after the first vibration test. Honda didn't. They doubled down. They treated instability like a puzzle, something to decode, not fear. The result became the RC211V, a machine powered by an engine that by every normal law of mechanics should have torn itself apart. Inside the development bays at HRC, they called it Project 5. But among those who worked on it, another name stuck: the Freak. It wasn't just because of its shape, but because of what it did to the rules of motion. Traditional engines balance by symmetry. A V4, for instance, divides forces evenly across 2 banks, canceling vibrations like 2 boxers trading perfect jabs. Add a 5th piston, and that rhythm collapses. It's like adding an extra drum to a perfect beat. Nothing fits. But Honda refused to believe in impossible. They started rethinking balance itself. They changed the cylinder angle from 90 degrees to 75.5. They altered crank pins, offset firing orders, and used counterweights like scalpel blades. Slowly, they discovered a rhythm hidden inside the noise. The V5 didn't eliminate vibration, it choreographed it. Every shudder had purpose. Every imbalance created balance somewhere else. That's the shocking truth no one expected. The world's most advanced race engine was born out of deliberate imperfection. Honda didn't fix chaos, they made it useful. Honda's V5 felt alive, not mechanical. Power surged in waves, a growl blending into a shriek that defied machines. Rivals thought their equipment failed. It sounded sentient. But brilliance came with danger. The engine ran blisteringly hot, melting components and testing riders' nerve. Every lap felt like taming something wild, unstable, and magnificent. But the brilliance of the V5 wasn't just in its design, it was in its danger. The engine ran so hot that early test bikes needed custom coolant loops. The rear cylinders baked everything around them. Test riders came back trembling, grinning, terrified. One described it as riding a grenade that somehow doesn't go off. Another said, if it explodes, it'll take the laws of engineering with it. Honda's V5 wasn't just power, it was defiance in motion. Built to prove fear wrong, it dominated instantly. Rivals stared, stunned. Perfection born from chaos, a machine that didn't follow rules. It rewrote them and dared the world to catch up. Because that was the real breaking point. Honda didn't just rewrite MotoGP's engineering book. They tore out the pages and replaced them with a warning label. If you're into stories like this, real engineering rebellion, not corporate marketing, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Ghosts from the past. Honda's obsession with doing things their way had deep roots. In the late 1970s through the 1990s, they were kings of the two-stroke world. Machines like the NS500 and the NSR500 defined an era. They screamed down straights, spit blue smoke, and claimed championships like clockwork. Riders trusted them because they were built not just to win, but to never quit. Then the FIM, the governing body, started tightening rules. Fewer cylinders, limited gears, reduced displacement. It was supposed to level the playing field, but to Honda, it felt like a leash. Rather than build within those confines, they walked away for nearly a decade. When they came back, they did it on their own terms and crushed everyone in sight. Between 1979 and 2001, Honda machines won 11 Premier Class championships, 6 of them back-to-back. When MotoGP allowed new engines, Honda saw more than opportunity. It saw revenge. Scarred by doubt, driven by pride, they didn't return to compete. They returned to prove a point, that impossible was just another word for unfinished. That point would take shape behind locked doors, in a part of the factory most people weren't supposed to know existed. Quick pit stop. Riding gear, tools, and essentials that last are in the description. The locked door prototype. In the months before the first MotoGP season of the modern era, strange sounds started echoing through Honda's test facility. Workers described the noise as uneven, half roar, half song. It didn't sound like a four-cylinder or a twin. It sounded alive, unpredictable. Someone said it reminded them of a two-stroke that had learned to breathe again. Behind sealed metal doors, a select team from Honda Racing Corporation worked in total secrecy. There were no public photos, no leaks, and no media briefings. Mechanics signed non-disclosure contracts so strict that some never spoke about it even after retirement. The team called the engine the heart because that's how it felt, beating differently, strong but erratic. It ran hot, vibrated oddly, and yet every dyno pull looked better than the last. Honda's V5 fired under the Spanish sun and silenced every skeptic. Its howl cut through the paddock, a storm trapped in steel. What began as mockery became revelation. Honda hadn't proved engineering. They'd redefined it, breaking theory itself. When the lights went green that year, no one realized they were watching the start of an engineering revolution. What Honda built wasn't just fast, it was impossible made real. The 75.5-degree secret. To understand what made Honda's 5-cylinder masterpiece possible, you have to start with a number, 75.5 degrees. That was the angle between the two banks of cylinders, a figure that looked meaningless to outsiders but became the heart of Honda's solution. Every V-type engine needs balance. A typical V4 sits at 90 degrees for symmetry, giving it smoothness and stability. But Honda's engineers deliberately broke that rule. narrowing the angle to 75.5 degrees. It wasn't random, it was math tuned into motion. In a V4, pistons fire in pairs, opposing each other perfectly. Add a fifth piston, and that symmetry vanishes. The result is chaos. Shaking, twisting, vibrations that threaten to tear a crankshaft apart. To counter this, Honda introduced offset crankpins and counterweights that danced to a calculated rhythm. It was like tuning an instrument that naturally played out of key. By staggering the timing, they found a harmony hidden inside the noise. When one piston reached its fastest speed, another was already balancing its force on the opposite side. The energy looped through the crankshaft in a way no other configuration had achieved before. Honda's 75.5-degree V balanced chaos and control. They forged perfection from imbalance, vibration into rhythm. 5 pistons in uneasy harmony turned instability into speed, proof that true mastery isn't silence, but motion refined to a heartbeat of precision. Once they solved the puzzle of balance, Honda's engineers realized something even more surprising. The extra cylinder didn't just add power, it made the whole engine smaller. Compact power, strange geometry. At first glance, 5 cylinders sound like more bulk, more pistons, more valves, more everything. But in Honda's case, the opposite happened. Because each piston was smaller, the engine's overall width shrank. That meant tighter spacing, better packaging, and a center of gravity perfectly suited for the violent rhythm of MGPT. Where a V4 had to stretch its arms to make power, the V5 kept its fists close and compact. The geometry of the RC211V's engine created a chain reaction. A shorter engine allowed engineers to pull the swing arm pivot closer to the crankshaft. That single change transformed the bike's handling. It turned sharper, held traction longer, and stayed calmer under acceleration. Riders described it as balanced chaos, a machine that felt on edge but never out of control. When the throttle opened, the power came alive in a predictable surge instead of a violent slap. Honda's compact V5 rewrote handling physics. Smaller engine, sharper balance, faster corners. Riders carved tighter lines, launched sooner, trusted traction completely. One extra piston, yet less weight. Proof that brilliance isn't always about power, but precision shaped in metal. But that 5th cylinder wasn't just about shape or size. It changed the rhythm of power itself, echoing a sound that felt hauntingly familiar to anyone who remembered the golden age of 2 strokes. The 5th pulse. Racers talk about feel, the heartbeat of the engine beneath them. A 4-stroke breathes differently than a 2-stroke. In a 2-stroke, you get a power pulse every revolution, an unbroken rhythm that feels like a constant wave. 4 strokes fire once every 2 revolutions, creating gaps in power that riders sense instantly. Honda's 5-cylinder layout bridged that divide. The extra piston gave one more firing event, tightening the pulse, bringing back that old sense of continuity that 2-stroke legends once lived for. When the RC211V first hit the track, the sound alone turned heads. It wasn't the clean drone of a V4 or the predictable hum of an inline 4. It had a growl with a hint of the past, like an echo of the NSR 500 reborn in metal. For older riders and mechanics, that tone hit deep. It reminded them of nights spent tuning carbs and chasing perfect resonance on smoky circuits. Honda's V5 didn't roar, it sang. That 5th pulse smoothed traction, erased hesitation, and turned power into music. Riders felt every cylinder speak. Data proved it. Continuous thrust, perfect rhythm. Engineering transformed into victory's unmistakable sound. But brilliance always has a cost. The more complex the masterpiece, the harder it is to keep alive. And Honda's V5 would soon prove that perfection demands pain, precision's price. For all its glory, the V5 was a mechanic's nightmare. 5 cylinders meant 10 camshafts, 20 valves, and a network of oil and coolant lines that snaked through the chassis like veins in a living creature. Everything fit with surgical precision, too tight for human comfort. To service the rear bank, mechanics had to strip half the bike. Valve checks became rituals that consumed hours, and even the smallest adjustment demanded steady hands and nerves of steel. The spacing of the crank pins and the delicate balance setup made every rebuild a high-stakes operation. One misaligned bolt could throw the entire balance off, turning smooth rotation into destructive vibration. Spare parts were rare and expensive. Each component felt handcrafted rather than mass-produced. Race teams carried entire spare engines not for convenience, but because they couldn't risk fixing one under pressure. Honda's V5 was a beast. Brilliant, yet temperamental. A few degrees off and chaos began. It demanded precision, punished shortcuts, and cost millions to maintain. More laboratory than motorcycle, it proved perfection exists, just not for everyone else. And as the trophies piled up, the strain started to show, not just in engines and budgets, but in the people who built and rode them. The men who rode the monster. The Honda RC 211V wasn't just a machine. It was a living, breathing animal, and the few riders who learned to control it became legends. Valentino Rossi tamed it first. Between 2002 and 2003, he made it look effortless, but behind the visor it was war. The bike's torque hit like a hammer, its power band arriving not in a wave but in a punch that could snap traction at full lean. Riders had to fight the bike's aggression, learning how to dance with chaos at 200 miles an hour. Controlling the V5 meant mastering its brutal engine braking. Downshifts could lock the rear wheel, and corner exits demanded micro-adjustments that tested human reflexes. There were no rider aids, no traction control to save them from mistakes. Every lap was hand-to-hand combat with physics. Rossi called it a real man's bike, a comment that wasn't bravado, it was confession. That machine didn't forgive lapses. Hayden wrestled Honda's V5 to glory with grit, not grace. Every champion bore its scars, trust tested, focus punished. It wasn't ridden, it was survived. A machine of brilliance and brutality, proving genius always lives beside danger. And while the riders fought it on track, the real battle was happening behind the pit wall, where wrenches, oil, and sleepless nights kept the impossible alive. Wrenches and war stories. In the garages where the RC211V was born, the sound of compressed air and torque wrenches filled the nights. Mechanics worked through exhaustion, hands blistered from handling scorching headers and fragile carbon fiber panels. Every component had a personality, every bolt a ritual. The V5's maintenance cycle didn't follow the rulebook, it wrote its own. Getting to the rear cylinder heads was a job that tested patience and anatomy. Mechanics had to pull major parts just to reach a single valve. Some joked that the engine wasn't assembled so much as woven. It wasn't far from the truth. Each rebuild was like surgery, precise, nerve-wracking, and completely unforgiving. Heat cycles had to be balanced perfectly. Timing marks had to align to fractions of a degree. Even a single misstep could turn a masterpiece into scrap metal. Honda's crew fought machines like soldiers. Burned hands, sleepless nights, victories measured in survival. They tuned by ear, bled for balance, and found pride in defiance. It wasn't manufacturing, it was war, and every bolt tightened carried their grit. But outside those garages, a different story was unfolding. While Honda's mechanics fought mechanical battles, the public was buying into a legend that would never make it to their own garages. From racetrack to showroom, when the checkered flags waved and the trophies stacked up, Honda dealers around the world lit up their showrooms with victory banners. Posters showed Rossi, Hayden, and the RC211V, leaned over, sparks flying, the word dominance printed in bold. Customers walked in expecting to see a piece of that MotoGP magic waiting for them under showroom lights. But what they found instead were production bikes that looked and felt like yesterday's machines. Honda's engineers had built a once-in-a-generation weapon, but translating that into a street bike was impossible. The RC211V's complexity couldn't survive mass production. Its 5-cylinder heart was too expensive, too delicate, too precise. So the road-going Hondas stayed predictable. 4 cylinders, familiar geometry, safe tuning. Riders asked, Where's the MGPTDNA? Dealers dodged the question with smiles and slogans. Honda's V5 victory never reached the streets. The factory soared while riders watched from afar, admiring brilliance they couldn't touch. Trophies piled high, but the bond between racer and garage faded. Honda won history yet lost its soul. That loss marked more than just disappointment. It marked the beginning of the end for one of racing's wildest eras. If you want more deep dives into the machines that changed racing forever, make sure to subscribe. We go past the headlines, into the garages, the grit, and the truth they don't print. Real stories, real riders, no shortcuts. The end of an era. By 2007, MotoGP changed again. The rules shrank engine displacement to 800 cubic centimeters, effectively killing the V5 overnight. Honda had to start over with a new layout. Just like that, the impossible engine that had redefined an era was retired to history. What had once been a weapon became a relic. Rival manufacturers, especially Yamaha and Ducati, had studied the V5 for years, trying to mimic its secrets. But when the regulations shifted, all that research turned to dust. The sport moved on, and the engineers who had created the most complex four-stroke ever built watched it fade away. The roar of the V5, that strange heartbeat of 5 cylinders firing in unison, vanished from the paddock. Honda's V5 roared, then vanished, 5 years from dominance to legend. Few ever saw it, yet its echo shaped every bike that followed. 5 cylinders became folklore, a fleeting masterpiece proving greatness burns brightest just before it disappears. Yet the story didn't end there. What that machine left behind would ripple through racing, manufacturing, and the culture of motorcycling itself, forever changing what it meant to build and to ride. Racing's new arms race. When Honda's 5-cylinder monster started rewriting lap records, it didn't just win races. It changed the nature of MotoGP itself. What began as an open competition of ingenuity turned into an arms race that only billion-dollar manufacturers could fight. The RC211V's success proved that raw engineering could conquer talent, that precision and data could overpower instinct. Once that genie escaped the bottle, no one could put it back. Before the V5 era, privateer teams still had a chance. They could buy customer bikes, tweak parts, and hope that guts and creativity might bridge the gap. But after 2002, that dream evaporated. The level of mechanical precision required to match Honda's pace was unreachable without a corporate budget. Suddenly, racing wasn't about who could ride hardest. It was about who could afford to fail the most times before succeeding. Honda's V5 turned racing from grit to graphs. Wrenches fell silent beneath the hum of laptops as heart gave way to hardware. Perfection replaced passion. Innovation became currency. Honda won the war, but priced out the very spirit that built it. And while the racetrack turned corporate, the ripple effect started spreading into the very factories that built the motorcycles parked in everyday garages. The manufacturing ripple. The V5 was supposed to stay in the world of prototypes, but innovation doesn't stay in its lane. The manufacturing lessons learned from that project, machining tolerances, sensor calibration, and lightweight material techniques, began seeping into Honda's mainstream production lines. On paper, that looked like progress. In practice, it changed the relationship between riders and their machines forever. Every new sport bike and touring model that came after carried a piece of that race DNA. Pistons forged to tighter tolerances, sensors tracking throttle position and lean angles with surgical precision, electronics replacing feel. The result was performance levels ordinary riders could barely tap, but at a cost few mechanics could afford to maintain. Honda's 5-cylinder genius made bikes faster and cleaner, but stripped away the grease-stained soul. Precision replaced participation. Riders became users, not builders. What began as engineering triumph ended as quiet loss, the bond between rider and wrench fading into data and distance. And nowhere did that loss hit harder than among the men who had once built and tuned motorcycles by hand, the craftsmen who kept the heartbeat of the old ways alive. The craftsman's dilemma. In the decades that followed, the old-school mechanics began to fade from factory floors. They weren't laid off in anger or rebellion. They were simply replaced by systems. Where once a man could diagnose an engine's health by the sound of its idle, now a sensor readout decided everything. The V5's precision demanded machinery, not intuition, and that mentality spread across the industry. Workshops that once buzzed with the rhythm of hand tools now echoed with the quiet hum of computers running diagnostics. The apprentices who used to learn by feel learned by code. Torquey wrenches gave way to laptops. Gut instinct became an obsolete skill. A generational divide opened between those who built and those who simply bought. Riding once meant feel, not firmware. Riders fixed bikes with grit and grease. Now, a blinking light ends the trip. Honda's 5-cylinder legacy proved progress impressive yet distant. Machines smarter, riders sidelined, and the bond between man and metal fading beyond reach. But every revolution, no matter how brilliant, carries a warning. A final truth that sits quietly beneath all the trophies and headlines. The real truth. In the end, the V5 was never just about horsepower or lap times. It was about pride, about the kind of courage it takes to build something that logic says shouldn't exist. That pride drove Honda's engineers to defy the rulebook, to gamble millions on a dream of mechanical perfection. And for a time, it worked. They built the impossible and proved that the limits of physics could bend under human determination. But that same pride had a shadow. It set a standard so high that it left humanity struggling to keep up. The V5 didn't just challenge rival factories, it challenged the definition of racing itself. When machines become this perfect, riders become passengers. When data becomes this dominant, instinct becomes noise. Progress inspires awe but steals what makes us human. Honda's V5 turned courage into calculation, passion into data, and victory into warning. Its 5-cylinder heartbeat still echoing. Proof that mastery and madness share one thin line, and every breakthrough demands a price. Honda didn't just break MotoGP, it proved how thin the line is between mastery and madness. Honda's V5 wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. It proved that limits exist only until someone dares to ignore them. But in breaking MotoGP, Honda also broke the illusion that progress comes without cost. That sound, that defiant 5-cylinder heartbeat, still echoes. A reminder that greatness always leaves scars, and perfection rarely survives its own brilliance. Because sometimes, winning isn't about going faster, it's about daring to build what no one else would even try. So that's the shocking truth behind how Honda broke MotoGP with its impossible engine, a masterpiece that proved brilliance can outrun reason. The RC211V didn't just win races, it redefined what we expect from machines. But in chasing perfection, something human got lost. Today's bikes may be faster, but they don't always feel alive. If you believe motorcycles should still have soul, not just sensors, hit subscribe.